Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The tropical rain of Manila drummed softly against the windshield of the black sedan as Manny Pacquiao watched the familiar streets of the Filipino capital transform into a blur of neon lights and wet reflections. He had returned for a business meeting in the Makati financial district, but something deeper had brought him back to this city that witnessed both his first steps in boxing and his greatest glories. The driver slowed down as they approached the corporate building where Manny had a scheduled appointment. It was a modern structure of glass and steel that contrasted dramatically with the simpler neighborhoods he knew so well. The vehicle slowly entered the underground parking garage where fluorescent lighting created dancing shadows between the concrete pillars. Manny adjusted his tie and checked his watch. He was early, as he always made it a habit to be. Punctuality was something he had developed since the difficult times, when every opportunity was too precious to be wasted. He observed the movement in the parking garage through the window, noticing the silent efficiency of the attendants guiding vehicles to their designated spots. That's when his eyes fixed on a familiar figure, a man of about 60 years old, wearing a faded blue parking attendant uniform, was carefully gesturing to guide a white SUV. There was something about that man's posture, about the way he moved his arms, that awakened a distant memory in Manny's mind. The champion's heart began to race as he observed more carefully. The man had graying hair and was slightly hunched, but his movement still maintained a precision that Manny recognized. It was the same precision that once taught him to position his feet in the ring, the same attention to detail that helped him perfect his famous left-hand combination, Bayani Delgado. The name echoed in Manny's mind like a precise punch. Bayani had been his trainer during the crucial early years of his career, when he was still just a young dreamer from General Santos City, trying to make his name in the boxing world. That man had been more than a technician. He had been a mentor, almost a father to the skinny boy who arrived at the gym with literal and metaphorical hunger. Manny remembered the endless nights at Bayani's small gym, where the smell of sweat and leather mixed with the aroma of cooked rice that the trainer's wife prepared for the neediest fighters. Bayani never charged for lessons from poor kids. On the contrary, he often paid for basic equipment himself and even for meals for those who showed true dedication. The memories flowed like a waterfall. Bayani teaching him to breathe correctly during grueling training sessions. Bayani holding the punching bag while shouting technical instructions in Tagalog. Bayani applying ice to his bruises after particularly intense sparring sessions. Bayani quietly celebrating each small victory in local tournaments, as if they were world conquests. But then came the inevitable separation. When Manny's career began to take off and bigger opportunities arose, he had to move on to more renowned trainers, better equipped gyms, more structured teams. The last time they met was over 15 years ago, when Manny was already establishing himself on the international scene. Now, seeing Bayani there, working as a parking attendant, Manny felt an overwhelming mixture of emotions: deep gratitude for the man who planted the seeds of his greatness, guilt for having lost contact over the years, and a growing determination that this reunion would not be just a passing coincidence. The sedan stopped, and Manny knew his life was about to take a completely unexpected direction. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle, knowing that stepping out of that car would mean confronting a piece of his past that he had inadvertently left behind. The success, the fame, the millions of dollars earned in the ring suddenly felt insignificant compared to the debt of gratitude he owed to the man directing traffic in that underground garage. Bayani continued his work, unaware that the most famous boxer in Filipino history was watching him from just a few meters away. The irony was not lost on Manny. Here was the man who taught him to fight for his dreams, now working in the shadows while his former student lived in the spotlight. The moment of decision had arrived, and Manny knew there was no turning back. Manny stepped out of the sedan with deliberate slowness, his polished shoes clicking against the wet concrete of the parking garage. The cool underground air carried the familiar scents of motor oil and damp cement, but underneath it all, he could almost smell the ghost of old boxing gloves and training mats that had defined so much of his youth. His security detail moved to follow, but Manny raised a subtle hand, signaling them to maintain their distance. Bayani was now guiding a silver sedan into a tight parking space, his weathered hands moving with the same methodical precision that once wrapped Manny's hands before fights. The years had clearly taken their toll on the older man. His shoulders, once broad and strong from holding heavy bags and demonstrating punching techniques, now curved slightly forward. His hair, which Manny remembered as thick and black, had thinned to reveal patches of scalp beneath the grey strands. As Manny watched, a flood of specific memories crashed over him like waves against a seawall. He remembered the small apartment above Bayani's gym where the trainer lived with his wife Marilu and their young daughter. The family had so little, yet they always found ways to help the struggling fighters who trained below. Marilu would prepare extra rice and dried fish, claiming she had cooked too much, though everyone knew it was her way of ensuring the hungriest boys got fed. Manny recalled the countless evenings when Bayani would stay late after all other fighters had gone home, working one-on-one with him on technique refinements. The trainer would position himself as a human target, allowing Manny to practice combinations until muscle memory took over. Bayani never complained about the long hours or the physical toll of being a practice opponent for an increasingly powerful young fighter. The most painful memory was of their last conversation. Manny had just signed with a prominent promoter who insisted on bringing in internationally recognized trainers. Bayani had smiled that day, clasping Manny's shoulder with genuine pride, telling him it was time to spread his wings. There had been no bitterness, no resentment, just a father's joy at seeing his son ready for bigger things. They had promised to stay in touch, but the whirlwind of professional boxing had swept Manny into a completely different world. Now watching Bayani in his parking attendant uniform, Manny felt the crushing weight of time and circumstance. While he had been earning millions in Las Vegas and becoming a global superstar, the man who had given him the foundation for everything was here, working a modest job to make ends meet. The contrast was stark and heartbreaking. Bayani finished directing the sedan and turned to walk toward the next incoming vehicle. That's when his eyes met Manny's across the concrete expanse. For a moment, time seemed suspended in the underground garage. Bayani's step faltered, his eyes widening as recognition slowly dawned. His clipboard slipped from his fingers, clattering to the ground as his mouth opened in silent shock. Manny felt his own breath catch in his throat. The years melted away as he saw the same kind eyes that had looked at him with such hope and belief when he was just a scrawny teenager from the provinces. Those eyes had seen potential when others saw only another poor kid with big dreams. They had witnessed his first knockouts, celebrated his amateur victories, and provided encouragement during his early professional struggles. The two men stood frozen, separated by perhaps 30 meters of parking garage, but connected by an invisible thread of shared history. Other parking attendants continued their work around them, oblivious to the profound moment unfolding. Cars continued to arrive and depart, but for Manny and Bayani, the world had narrowed to just this recognition, this reunion that neither had expected. Manny could see the questions flickering across Bayani's weathered face. Was it really him? Was this the same boy who used to sleep on the gym floor when he couldn't afford rent? The same young fighter who would share his meager meals with other struggling boxers? Slowly, Bayani's shock transformed into something else entirely. His eyes, which had initially widened in disbelief, now glistened with unmistakable pride. Despite everything, despite the years of separation and the different paths their lives had taken, there was no trace of envy or bitterness in that gaze, only the pure, uncomplicated joy of a teacher seeing his student's success. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and emotions too complex for immediate expression. Manny began walking toward Bayani with measured steps, each footfall echoing softly in the concrete cavern of the parking garage. His heart hammered against his ribcage with the same intensity he felt before stepping into the ring for championship fights. But this nervousness was different, more personal, more vulnerable. The distance between them seemed to stretch and contract simultaneously, as if the universe itself was unsure how this moment should unfold. Bayani remained motionless, his aging hands hanging at his sides as he watched his former protege approach. The clipboard lay forgotten at his feet, its pages scattered by a gentle breeze from the garage's ventilation system. Other parking attendants had noticed the unusual scene, a well-dressed man walking purposefully toward their colleague, but they maintained respectful distances, sensing the gravity of whatever was happening. As Manny drew closer, more details of Bayani's current life became painfully visible. The trainer's uniform was clean but worn, mended in several places with careful stitching, that spoke of someone who couldn't afford replacements. His shoes, once polished black leather, now showed the accumulated wear of countless hours standing on concrete floors. Most heartbreaking of all was the name tag pinned to his chest pocket, identifying him simply as employee number 847, reducing a man who had shaped champions to just another number in a corporate system. The memories continued flooding Manny's consciousness as he walked. He remembered Bayani's morning routine at the gym, always arriving before dawn to prepare the training space, checking equipment for safety, and brewing coffee in a dented metal pot that somehow produced the best coffee Manny had ever tasted. The trainer would stand in the doorway as fighters arrived, greeting each one personally, asking about their families, their struggles, their dreams. Manny recalled the way Bayani studied boxing matches on an old television with rabbit ear antennas, taking notes in a battered composition notebook. The trainer would analyze professional fights for hours, breaking down techniques and strategies that he would later teach to his students. He never had access to high-tech video equipment or computer analysis, but his keen eye and deep understanding of boxing fundamentals made him as effective as any modern trainer. There was also the memory of Bayani's hands, calloused from years of holding mitts and heavy bags, but surprisingly gentle when tending to injuries or adjusting protective gear. Those same hands had taught Manny to wrap his own hands properly, a ritual that became almost sacred in its precision and care. Even now, in high-end gyms with professional staff, Manny still wrapped his hands exactly as Bayani had taught him. When only 10 feet separated them, Manny could see the trembling in Bayani's weathered hands. The older man's eyes had filled with tears that he was struggling to contain, his professional composure battling with overwhelming emotion. Behind those tears, Manny recognized the same fierce pride that Bayani had always carried. Not pride in his own accomplishments, but pride in his fighters' successes. Bayani's lips moved silently, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find adequate words for this impossible moment. His eyes traveled over Manny's expensive suit, his confident posture, the unmistakable aura of success that surrounded him like an invisible crown. Yet beneath the assessment, there remained the same unconditional affection that had sustained their relationship all those years ago. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that somehow made this reunion feel both stark and dreamlike. Around them, the mundane business of the parking garage continued, but for these two men, time had become elastic, stretching this precious moment into something that felt both eternal and impossibly brief. The final steps between them dissolved as Manny closed the distance, and without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around Bayani in a fierce embrace that spoke louder than any words could. The older man's body went rigid with shock for a moment before melting into the hug, his weathered hands clutching at Manny's expensive jacket as if afraid this moment might vanish like a mirage. Manny could feel Bayani's shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion, and he realized that his own eyes had filled with tears. The scent of the older man brought back a rush of sensory memories, the combination of liniment, coffee, and the faint smell of cigarettes that Bayani used to smoke during evening conversations about boxing philosophy. It was the smell of home, of belonging, of a time when dreams seemed both impossible and inevitable. As they stood embraced in the middle of the parking garage, Manny's mind traveled back to one particular evening that had defined their relationship. It was after Manny had lost his third amateur fight, a devastating defeat that had him questioning whether he had what it took to succeed in boxing. He had sat on the gym floor, head in his hands, while other fighters packed up their gear and headed home. Bayani had approached him with 2 cups of coffee and sat down beside him on the worn mat. Without saying anything about the fight, the trainer had begun telling stories about great boxers who had faced early defeats. He spoke of Muhammad Ali's loss to Joe Frazier, of Roberto Duran's setbacks, of how champions were often forged in the furnace of temporary failure rather than born from easy victories. That night, Bayani had stayed with Manny until well past midnight, not offering empty encouragement, but instead sharing practical wisdom about resilience, dedication, and the long view of a boxing career. It was the kind of mentorship that went far beyond technical instruction, touching the very core of what it meant to pursue greatness despite overwhelming odds. Now holding his former trainer in this underground garage, Manny felt the full weight of how that conversation had shaped his entire approach to adversity. Every comeback from defeat in his professional career, every moment when he had dug deep to find extra reserves of determination, could be traced back to lessons learned in that simple gym with this remarkable man. When they finally separated, Manny could see that Bayani was struggling to process this unexpected reunion. The trainer's hands moved unconsciously, straightening his uniform as if trying to present himself more professionally, perhaps feeling self-conscious about his current circumstances compared to Manny's obvious success. But Manny's reaction was not what anyone might have expected. Instead of awkwardness or pity, his face showed something entirely different, a determination that those who knew him would recognize as the same expression he wore when entering the ring for the biggest fights of his career. His jaw was set, his eyes focused with laser intensity, and there was an energy building within him that suggested major decisions were being made. Manny began looking around the parking garage with new eyes, no longer seeing it as just a place to park cars, but as a problem to be solved, a situation that required the same strategic thinking he applied to boxing matches. His mind was already working through possibilities, calculating resources, considering options that could transform this encounter from a mere nostalgic reunion into something much more significant. The champion who had conquered 8 different weight divisions was now facing a different kind of challenge, one that had nothing to do with athletic achievement and everything to do with loyalty, gratitude, and the debts that success creates to those who made it possible. Manny stepped back slightly, his hands still resting on Bayani's shoulders, as he studied his former trainer's face with the same intensity he once reserved for scouting opponents. The years had etched deep lines around Bayani's eyes, and there was a weariness there that spoke of long shifts, difficult circumstances, and dreams that had been quietly set aside for survival. As Manny observed, he noticed details that painted a clearer picture of Bayani's current situation. The trainer's uniform pants were slightly too large, held up by a worn leather belt that had been punched with additional holes to accommodate weight loss. His wedding ring, which Manny remembered as a simple gold band, was now wrapped with tape to prevent it from slipping off fingers that had grown thinner over the years. The realization hit Manny like a body shot to the ribs. While he had been living in mansions and earning millions per fight, the man who had laid the foundation for his success was struggling to make ends meet in one of the most basic jobs imaginable. The irony was crushing. Bayani, who had taught fighters to reach for their highest potential, was now relegated to directing cars in an underground garage. Manny's mind began working with the same strategic precision that had made him a champion across multiple weight classes. He started calculating not just immediate solutions, but long-term plans that could honor the debt he felt he owed to his mentor. This wasn't about charity or pity, it was about justice, about ensuring that the man who had given so much received something meaningful in return. He thought about Bayani's family, wondering about Marilu and their daughter. Were they struggling too? Had medical bills or other financial hardships forced Bayani into this position? The questions multiplied in Manny's mind, each one adding to his growing sense of urgency about taking action. Around them, the parking garage continued its routine operations, but Manny barely noticed the cars or other attendants. His focus had narrowed to this moment, this opportunity to make a difference that felt more important than any championship belt he had ever won. He was formulating a plan that went beyond simple financial assistance, something that would restore dignity while honoring the contributions Bayani had made to boxing and to his life specifically. Manny remembered the small notebook where Bayani used to write training observations and fighter profiles. The trainer had filled countless pages with detailed notes about technique improvements, psychological insights, and strategic observations that would have impressed professional sports psychologists. That knowledge, that expertise, was still there in the man standing before him. Despite the humble uniform he now wore, the champion's thoughts turned to his various business ventures and boxing-related projects. He owned gyms, training facilities, and had connections throughout the boxing world. Suddenly, possibilities began crystallizing in his mind, ways to utilize Bayani's expertise while providing him with the respect and compensation he deserved. But this wasn't just about creating a job or offering financial help. Manny understood that what mattered most was restoring Bayani's sense of purpose, his connection to the sport that had defined so much of his life. The trainer needed to feel valuable again, needed to know that his knowledge and experience were still relevant and respected. As these thoughts coalesced into concrete plans, Manny felt a familiar surge of determination, This was the same feeling he experienced before making career-defining decisions, the absolute certainty that he was about to embark on something that would change lives, starting with the life of the man who had changed his own destiny all those years ago. The surprise that would soon unfold wasn't just about Manny's generosity, it was about his understanding of what truly mattered in life and his commitment to honoring those who had helped him achieve greatness. Manny pulled out his phone with the same decisive movement he used when throwing his famous straight left hand. His fingers moved quickly across the screen as he scrolled through his contacts, his mind already several steps ahead in executing the plan that was rapidly taking shape. Bayani watched with confusion as the world champion began making what appeared to be urgent business calls right there in the middle of the parking garage. The first call was to his business manager, a conversation that lasted several intense minutes as Manny spoke in rapid Tagalog, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. Even without understanding the specific words, Bayani could sense that something significant was being set in motion, something that involved considerable resources and immediate action. As Manny made his second call, this time to what sounded like a construction contractor, Bayani felt a growing sense of bewilderment mixed with concern. He had never expected this reunion to become anything more than a brief, nostalgic conversation. The idea that Manny might be making major business decisions based on their chance encounter seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Manny's third call was to a real estate agent, and this conversation was longer and more detailed. He was asking about commercial properties in Quezon City, specifically inquiring about spaces suitable for boxing gyms. His questions were precise and knowledgeable, indicating he had thought about this type of project before. When he mentioned needing something available for immediate lease with the possibility of purchase, the urgency in his voice was unmistakable. Bayani's mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. The boy he had trained all those years ago was now conducting high-level business transactions with the same focused intensity he had once brought to mastering boxing combinations. The transformation was remarkable, yet underneath the confident businessman, Bayani could still recognize the determined young fighter who never gave up on his dreams. During the fourth call, Manny began discussing equipment procurement with what sounded like a sporting goods supplier. He was ordering professional-grade boxing equipment, heavy bags, speed bags, ring canvas, training mats, and protective gear. The quantities he mentioned suggested he was outfitting a complete training facility, not just purchasing items for personal use. As each conversation concluded, Manny's expression became more focused, more determined. He was orchestrating something complex and expensive, but his demeanor suggested that cost was irrelevant compared to the importance of the outcome. This wasn't impulsive charity. It was a carefully calculated investment in something that mattered deeply to him. Between calls, Manny would glance at Bayani with an expression that mixed apology for the delay with excitement about what was coming. The trainer could see that whatever was being planned would somehow involve him, though the scope and nature of it remained mysterious. Other parking attendants had begun to notice the unusual scene, but they maintained respectful distances while stealing curious glances at the well-dressed man making animated phone calls near their colleague. Manny's fifth call was the most intriguing yet. He was speaking with someone about permits and licenses, specifically mentioning the need to establish a boxing academy that could train both amateur and professional fighters. His questions about zoning requirements and business registration procedures indicated this wasn't just a vague idea. It was a concrete plan moving toward immediate implementation. As the calls continued, Bayani began to understand that he was witnessing something extraordinary. Manny wasn't just offering help or expressing gratitude. He was creating an entirely new opportunity, something that would honor their shared history while building toward a meaningful future. The surprise that the title promised was beginning to reveal itself, and it was bigger than anything Bayani could have imagined. After completing his final phone call, Manny slipped his phone back into his jacket pocket and turned to face Bayani with an expression that radiated quiet satisfaction mixed with anticipation. The older man had watched this whirlwind of business activity with growing amazement, but nothing had prepared him for what Manny was about to reveal through his actions rather than words. Manny reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew a leather portfolio, from which he extracted several official-looking documents. As he spread them on the hood of a nearby car, Bayani could see they were property leases, business registration forms, and architectural blueprints. The champion had come to this meeting prepared for something entirely different than a routine business appointment. The blueprints revealed the detailed plans for a state-of-the-art boxing academy, complete with multiple training rings, equipment areas, locker rooms, and even a small apartment that could serve as living quarters for a head trainer. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from the ventilation systems to the specialized flooring that would provide optimal support for intensive training sessions. As Bayani studied the documents, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he traced the architectural lines, he began to understand the full scope of what Manny had orchestrated. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment gesture born from guilt or pity. This was a comprehensive plan that had been developing in Manny's mind for some time, waiting only for the right moment and the right person to bring it to life. The location specified in the lease agreement was in an accessible area of Quezon City, strategically positioned to serve young fighters from various socio-economic backgrounds. The facility would be large enough to accommodate dozens of trainees simultaneously, with separate areas for different skill levels and training intensities. Most importantly, the plans included provisions for providing meals and basic support services for fighters who needed them, echoing the same generous spirit that Bayani had once shown in his own modest gym. Manny had envisioned something that went far beyond a typical boxing facility. The academy would serve as a comprehensive development center, where young Filipino fighters could receive not only technical training, but also educational support, nutritional guidance, and mentorship in life skills. It was designed to address all the challenges that Manny himself had faced as a young boxer, creating a pathway to success that removed many of the obstacles that typically prevented talented fighters from reaching their potential. The most significant document was a formal contract naming Bayani as the academy's head trainer and general manager, with a salary that was more than respectable. It was transformational. The position would come with full benefits, the apartment on site, and complete authority over training programs and fighter development. Most importantly, it would restore Bayani's identity as what he had always been meant to be, a teacher, mentor, and guide for the next generation of boxing champions. As the reality of the situation settled over him, Bayani felt his knees grow weak. The contrast between his current circumstances and this unexpected opportunity was almost too dramatic to process. Just hours earlier, he had been directing cars in an underground garage, worrying about paying rent and supporting his family. Now, he was being offered the chance to lead a world-class training facility that would serve as his legacy and his contribution to the sport he loved. The surprise wasn't just in the magnitude of Manny's gesture, it was in the thoughtfulness behind it. This wasn't charity masquerading as opportunity. It was a genuine recognition of Bayani's value and expertise, packaged in a way that honored both men's dignity while creating something meaningful for future generations of fighters. Manny watched Bayani's reaction with the same intensity he had once brought to studying opponents before major fights, reading every emotion that crossed his former trainer's face. 6 months later, the Pacquiao Delgado Boxing Academy stood as a testament to the power of gratitude transformed into action. The gleaming facility buzzed with activity as dozens of young fighters from across Manila pursued their dreams under the expert guidance of head trainer Bayani Delgado, whose transformation had been as remarkable as the building itself. Bayani moved through the training floor with renewed purpose, his posture straighter, his eyes bright with the same passion that had once made him such an effective mentor to a young Manny Pacquiao. The parking attendant uniform had been replaced by proper training gear, and his weathered hands once again held focus mitts and coaching pads instead of traffic directing signs. The years seemed to have fallen away as he worked with fighters who reminded him daily why he had fallen in love with boxing in the first place. The academy had become more than either man had originally envisioned. Word had spread throughout the boxing community about the caliber of training available there, and young fighters from the provinces were making pilgrimages to train under the man who had helped shape a legend. Bayani's reputation, which had been overshadowed for so many years, was experiencing a renaissance that brought him recognition from boxing officials, sports journalists, and fellow trainers across Southeast Asia. Manny visited the academy regularly, not as a celebrity making appearances, but as a student returning to learn from his teacher. He would work out alongside the other fighters, demonstrating techniques and sharing experiences, but always deferring to Bayani's expertise and authority. These sessions had become legendary among the trainees, who witnessed firsthand the respect and genuine affection between the world champion and his former mentor. The relationship between Manny and Bayani had evolved into something even deeper than their original trainer-student bond. They had become partners in a mission that extended far beyond individual success to encompass the development of an entire generation of Filipino fighters. Their collaboration represented a perfect fusion of Manny's resources and global connections with Bayani's technical knowledge and understanding of fighter development. The Academy's success had already begun producing results. Several young fighters were showing exceptional promise, and 2 had already signed professional contracts with reputable promoters. More importantly, the facility was serving its broader mission of providing education, nutrition, and life skills training to young people who might otherwise have limited opportunities for advancement. For Bayani, the transformation had been life-altering in ways that extended far beyond financial security. His wife Marilu had been able to leave her factory job to help manage the Academy's administrative functions, and their daughter was attending university with her tuition fully covered. The family had moved from their cramped apartment to the comfortable living quarters above the gym, where Bayani could be available around the clock for his fighters. The parking garage where they had been reunited had become a symbol of serendipity and second chances. Manny often reflected on how easily he might have missed that moment, might have entered the building through a different entrance or arrived at a different time. The randomness of their encounter had led to something that felt destined, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together at precisely the right moment. As Manny watched Bayani working with a promising young heavyweight, he felt a profound sense of completion. The debt he had carried for years, not a financial debt but an emotional and spiritual one, had been transformed into something generative and forward-looking. Instead of simply repaying the past, they were investing in the future. The surprise had turned out to be mutual. Manny surprised by his own capacity for meaningful action, and Bayani surprised by the discovery that his most important contributions to boxing still lay ahead of him. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.